So the joke is love, eros, and sex, and the sex part's kind of titillating. People, well, what does guide say about sex? So I thought that I would go through them a bit, and I thought I'd go ahead and start with sex. And one of the reasons is that in September, I'm going to be doing a whole teleconference on Lecture 207, which is the spiritual significance of sexuality. So I didn't think that I needed to devote too much time in this teleconference to that. And for those of you who are most interested in that, we put that first on the plate. Like John said, that's what people are interested in. So what the guide teaches about the sex force is in one simple sentence. The sex force is the creative force on any level of existence. The sex force is the creative force on any level of existence. So as I said in the beginning, you can hear this on a primal human level, you can hear it on a species or civilization level, but you can also hear this in the unitive plane, that the sex force, expressed in different ways and in different phases and energetic realms, is the creative force throughout the universe. Again, I'm hearing a lot of background noise. If people could hit *6 and silence their phones, it would be appreciated here. So sex being an active force, whether it is expressed in sexuality on the planet with humans, or as a force alone of creative, procreative force in a spiritual, emotional, or even intellectual effort. So that is the position that the guide takes about sexuality, acknowledging that it is a major human event. So he goes on to say that pure sex, the sex force alone, without eros and without love, is utterly selfish. Now again, you can read that as saying, oh, I must be bad when I'm having sex. Or you could consider that it simply is utterly selfish. And if sex is the creative force in the universe, the most powerful creative force, then what quality of being purely selfish mixes with being a powerful creative force in the universe? It would sound like these two don't fit. And yet the guide is saying that this would be about the pure sexual force, once again, without the influences of love and without the influences of eros. So the fact that something in its purity is fundamentally self-centered does not make it negative or bad, but it is something to consider. If that is true, and there's always an if. When you're reading the Pathwork lectures, the guide is very, very clear. Do not accept what he says. Think about it, work with it, argue with it. It is a gift for you to consider, not a command. So in terms of sex as the possibly being utterly selfish, what would that mean? And the guide goes on to say that, for instance, if sex mixes with love, such as in a long-term relationship, there can be affection, there can be caring, there can be a number of very, very positive elements in a relationship. But without the element of eros, it lacks a spark. That when you mix sex and eros, you can get a lot of energy going. And yet, that energy doesn't have any place to land if there is only sex and eros. So there's a driving force and a spark of energy, a soul movement of exploration. With those two together, it is possible that this could remain in an area of actual avoidance of long-term intimacy. And I think that explains what the guide is saying about sex alone being utterly selfish. That movement and creativity without consideration of another is about our creativity and our driving force and our ability to manifest in the world, in energy and in spirit, rather than about relationship or a loving community with other people. So without going into negativity about selfish, the sex force simply isn't complete in and of itself. The other thing that the guide speaks about is that sexuality always manifests at first in a very selfish and immature way. That's how we are as we grow up. And because a lot of human beings are not spiritually strongly developed, there's a lot of sexuality on the planet that isn't mature. And so societies have had to deal with this. They've had to deal with the strong creative force that is being moved and held by people who are not particularly emotionally or spiritually mature. And that this has led to the condemnation of sex among cultures and philosophies. And again, this is where I found a bit of tenderness. He simply says that was in response to a reality. That because sex was misused and misunderstood and misapplied, it became aligned with badness and became I don't want to use the word equivocated, but it's some word like that. Equivocated is not the right word. But sex equals sin is in effect a solution to the difficulties of the fact that we haven't fully developed and we haven't certainly matured all around across the planet in our attitudes towards sexuality. And of course, once sex is put right next to sin and hooked to it, then we don't want to go there. So it's an invitation for a terrible vicious circle where sexuality remains immature and underdeveloped because it's been associated with negative aspects of human life. So that kind of wraps up sex. That's really all the time the guide spends on sex.